It doesn't seem to matter how many times you've been to Tasmania's southwest. With every visit, this remote corner of Australia presents a diverse character. A different weather, a different light, a different mood. I've come back now to seek out what I think epitomises this landscape and its pristine beauty. To find the essential element that characterises this place. The southern shores of Tasmania are the first major landmass reached by the winds and storms that blow up directly from the Antarctic. Life here clings with difficulty to a windswept landscape. But today dawn's fine enough and it's sunny. It is one of those perfect days without wind, at least for now. It's tempting to take an early morning swim in South Cape Rivulet, but the sunny scene is deceptive. These are the chilly waters of the Southern Ocean. By mid-morning, the wind is up and the tranquil landscape has dramatically changed. It's time to seek shelter or move on. As for me, I'm heading inland, away from these unprotected shores to the high and hilly country of the interior. Here, amongst the high peaks, the deep valleys are more protected. And in this friendly, temperate climate, ancient forests can flourish. The old-growth forests of Tasmania are continually under threat from a timber industry hungry for resources, and the integrity of the South West World Heritage Area would be threatened should these resources be lost. The southwest lies at the southern extremity of Australia's island state of Tasmania. This remoteness adds to its attractiveness, and it was always thought that there would be no doubt that such a pristine land would be conserved pretty much as it is in its natural state.
I've been walking now for about 3 hours and have finally reached Junction Creek. You don't really feel you've reached the southwest until you finally cross this creek.
But if the integrity of its forests are under threat today, there was a time when this land was under an equally devastating threat from development. A time that I can still remember quite vividly. And, unfortunately, it was a time when the wilderness lost. The heart of Tasmania's southwest was removed, and it has remained that way ever since. A land without a heart. So I have come back now to explore the best of what remains, what I call the jewels of the southwest, the superb glacial lakes of the Western Arthur Range. And there they finally are. The chain of quartzite peaks known as the Western Arthurs, named after a former governor of Tasmania in the 1800s, and not fully explored until much later. High up amongst those quartzite peaks lie the myriad lakes, one of Australia's best natural treasures. Tomorrow I'll do a day walk up into the Western Arthur Range as far as Lake Oberon, starting and finishing from here, from Junction Creek campsite. That's quite a long walk for a day, but it is November and the days are quite long. The sun doesn't set till about 8 o'clock at night and there's light till about 9 p.m. I'll just carry a small day pack and I won't carry any water because there's plenty en route. That'll keep my load a bit lighter. Well, it's just on 7 AM and the weather is still fairly overcast, but I'll try a quick day trip up onto the range and try and have a look at the first few lakes. I am really climbing the range today for 3 reasons. Firstly, as a mountain climber and a bushwalker, let's face it, altitude tends to be a drug. There's an obsession to continually get more of it. If it was possible to climb higher, you probably would. It's now 9 o'clock in the morning and I'm about halfway up Moraine A. There's still a lot of cloud around, certainly on the peaks above me, but there's a bit of blue sky, so there's a chance that things might clear up later in the day. South West Tasmania is a vast, unpopulated wilderness. In fact, part of a World Heritage Area which stretches some 250 kilometres from the southern coastline towards the north of Tasmania. It is simply one peak after another, all the way to the horizon. Some parts of this region have a lot of visitors, but not so the Western Arthurs. On this trip, in the 6 days I was here, I met 6 people, and half of those were solo walkers like myself. The Arthur Range is a wilderness region in the strictest sense. There are no facilities, no huts, and any that once existed have long since been removed. The track is the only human intrusion. In Australia, it is the perfect place to go mountain climbing. Being of glacial origin, each ridge of the Western Arthurs is called a moraine. And, failing a better system, these ridges have been simply named after the letters of the alphabet. So today I am climbing Moraine A. The second reason I'm up here today is, as I mentioned, to view the superb glacial lakes of the Arthurs. And the third reason for my climb? Well, that is to catch a glimpse of something I would rather not see at all. Lake Pedder. Or should I say New Lake Pedder, or perhaps the Pedder Impoundment, since the original and natural lake now lies some 20 metres below the surface. The valley of Lake Pedder was flooded in 1972 to produce hydroelectric power. With the destruction of the original lake, the South West lost its heart. After years of controversy, the flooding went ahead, even though there was huge support for preserving the superb beauty of the original lake. All that happened in the late 1960s and early 1970s, and if the same environmental and political issues arose today, it is hard to imagine the dam ever being built. The original Lake Pedder was the heart and the jewel of the southwest. Ringed by high ranges, its waters were mostly protected from strong winds. But when it did blow, the force was enough to produce vast sandbars, and of course the lake's famous pink quartzite beach. This beach stretched for several kilometres and made the perfect landing strip for light aircraft. There were no roads, you either walked in or flew. The waters of the lake flowed along the narrow meandering channel of the Serpentine River, intricate in the extreme, passing through tea tree flats with countless lagoons. It was a botanical paradise, and all this is now gone. The water from Lake Pedder is channelled to the nearby Lake Gordon, whose spectacular wall has now become a tourist attraction in itself. The combined waters from Lakes Pedder and Gordon produce about 13% of Tasmania's power, with the water from Lake Pedder contributing just less than half this amount. So Lake Pedder's contribution to power generation is significant, about 6% of Tasmania's supply. Many today are suggesting the Pedder impoundment be drained, to once again restore this World Heritage Area to its former natural state. Experts say the original lake would regenerate in time. The wide sandy beach is still there, covered only by 20 metres of water and a thin film of sediment that would wash away with the first rains. It's a dream for many that will simply not go away. Now finally I was high up amongst the lakes of the Western Arthurs. Far smaller than even the original Lake Pedder, these lakes epitomise the beauty of the South West. Formed by glacial action eons ago, they nestle between the craggy grey and white quartzite peaks of the range, and their tannin-stained waters enhance the pink sandy tones in the shallows. Lake Oberon is certainly one of the more spectacular lakes. Deep and silent, it is perfectly framed with a backdrop of crag stretching all the way to Federation Peak in the east. Unlike the Lake Pedder region of the southwest, the rocky terrain up here is far too steep to allow these lakes to have extensive beaches. Where a sandy shoreline does exist, it is often submerged. More likely, the subalpine shrubs and trees grow right down and even encroach on the water's edge, forming an almost impenetrable barrier. There is no easy access here to the lake, and you are obliged to keep to the more open grassy and rocky crests. The few tracks that exist through this tangle of wiry scoparia and pandani bushes are often difficult and tiring to follow at the best of times.
Well, I'm finally here at one of the more spectacular lakes in the range, Lake Oberon. I think it's time for some lunch.
A day trip from Junction Creek up to Lake Oberon and return means you do not have much idle time. I had to start thinking about getting back down. Luckily for my now tired legs, the route was all downhill. It would be a much faster trip than the ascent. Both the sun and the temperature were dropping quickly. When the clouds begin turning red, you know you have only about an hour or so of light left. I shift the walking pace up a notch and begin a slow jog back to my tent in the gathering gloom.
Well, I'm back now from the day walk up to Lake Oberon and back. It was a very long day. I started out at about 7 AM and got to Lake Oberon, the lookout to Lake Oberon from the saddle, about 2 o'clock, and I've just arrived back here at my tent at about 9:30 in the dark. So that was quite a long and tiring day.
Overnight, light clouds have moved in, and it looks like a change in the weather might be on the way. I've decided to head east down the plains to 7 Mile Creek, from where I can once again climb up onto the Arthur Range. But I'm not so sure about the weather. I don't want to be caught too high up in bad weather, so I'll play it as it comes. This is Mackay's track, cut in 1835 by an ex-convict, Alexander Mackay. The idea was to open up the region to help extract the valuable Huon pine. The Arthur Plains themselves, covered in tusks of button grass, proved to be too infertile for agriculture or even grazing. Today these plains are simply a buffer to put some distance between the roadhead and the more valuable landscape of the Arthur Range. The button grass vegetation of the plains gives the creeks their deep golden brown tannin colour. But it's okay for drinking and it's icy cold. Most of the creeks of the Arthur Plains have their source somewhere high in the Arthur Range, at one of the many glacial lakes.
Today I'm camped at 7 Mile Creek in the middle of the Arthur Plains, and this afternoon I plan to walk up Moraine Cay, back up into the Western Arthurs and camp at Promontory Lake.
The afternoon slips away as I watch the quiet waters of 7 Mile Creek flow past my tent, downstream, into the forest, and on towards the Huon River and the sea. But suddenly the quiet is broken. The wind picks up and I have to accept the weather is changing. Still, I set out for Promontory Lake as planned, not knowing how serious the storm would be. With all my gear on my back this time, I can quickly set up camp at any time if I need to.
Shortly after leaving 7 Mile Creek, the wind started to pick up and a cold front had come in. So I didn't go as far as Promontory Lake. I stopped at Lake Juno instead. There was no point proceeding, the wind was too strong and the rain was starting to come in, and there's good protection here anyway. So tomorrow, weather permitting, we'll have a look at Promontory Lake then. It's about 5 o'clock now. I'm tent bound, so there's very little else to do but to start the evening meal. And that consists of orange juice to start with, made with orange crystals. Then soup, I think it's spring onion tonight. And main course is beef teriyaki. And I'll follow that with tea or coffee and chocolate. So things aren't all that bad after all, really.
Tent bound in a snowstorm in the Western Arthurs. What do you do? How do you kill time in the cramped quarters of a one-man tent? It affects people differently. You can eat and drink. Some people might read a book. Myself, as a photographer, I mostly prefer to listen and watch the landscape, to see its ever-changing moods. Up at Promontory Lake, it's a bleak and frosty scene. But there are hints the storm will be short-lived as sunny patches are beginning to strike the peaks above. The cloud seems to be breaking up. The wind is still strong though. The roaring 40s do pack a punch in this corner of Tasmania. Finally, more settled conditions prevail, and I can at last think about climbing out of my tent and taking a walk across this alpine landscape. It's easy to understand how the strong southwesterly winds can shift sand grains en masse to build up the mighty Lake Pedder beach, but up here on the steep slopes where the mountain streams begin, there's little chance of much sand being retained. In every lake, however, there is evidence of the pink and white quartzite grains that have eroded from the crags above. These pink and white colours are the trademark of this quartzite landscape, a rocky landscape that dictates what and where it will grow. The lichens cling to the bare rocky surfaces and feed off the moisture from the clouds that envelop these peaks. The ever-present scoparia dominates the more fertile slopes. A scourge to bushwalkers because of its rough and sharp leaves, it makes up for its presence with a magnificent flower. Everywhere there are signs of past times. The ghostly white skeletons of the Kimberley pine remind us that at times wildfire can quickly destroy what has taken a long time to create. The Western Arthurs are full of surprises. Just when you think there's nothing more here than quartzite peaks and windswept moors, you come across a secluded rainforest like this at Promontory Lake. Water is the dominant element that is ever present throughout the Western Arthurs. Sunny days are short-lived, and above all, it is the rain and driving winds that remain uppermost in my memories of the range. It starts with a trickle and slowly builds to a river. On its way, the water feeds the ferny grottos, it erodes the rocky landscape, but ultimately it gives life to the entire range. By the next morning, sunny days are back in fashion. But for me, it's time to pack up and go. My food supplies are now low. Luckily, I'm up early enough to catch the first light across Lake Juno. At this time of day, the surface is a mirror, before the winds pick up and destroy the reflections. The clear skies have tempted me to make one final dash to the top, this time to the summit of Mount Scorpio in the middle of the range for what are probably the best views of the entire region. Lake Juno and Promontory Lake are now far below, and once again the horizon is dominated by the craggy peaks of the Arthurs. The glacial origin of the range is now quite apparent, with ice-carved ridges and sharp peaks in all directions. It is truly a unique piece of the Australian landscape. The length of any stay in the southwest is dependent on how much you are prepared to carry. I had provisions for 6 days, and now my time was up. But what will last longer than my brief stay here will be the memories of the glacial lakes. A unique landscape for a continent that is more often associated with dry deserts. There will be memories too, for that is all there are now, of another lake that once existed here. The lakes of the Western Arthurs are indeed the jewels of the southwest. They are icons of beauty in a wilderness that has been tainted by man's intrusion. Somewhere below the vast watery expanses of this impounded lake lies the true heart of the southwest. It is now for future generations to decide when this heart is once again allowed to beat.